When it comes to the fate of Pluto, most of us have very strong opinions, and I know that this is a very contentious topic in the nerdverse. This is all because in 2006, the International Astronomical Union decided that planet Pluto quite don't make the planetary height cutoff. You know, the one they had just made up. They reclassified it as a dwarf planet. I mean, sure, it is just as arbitrary as how somebody decided the technicalities for human dwarfism. But unhappily for a lot of us, turns out they can just do that. But this is not about that story. This story is about the discovery of dwarf planet Pluto and about this guy, Percival Lowell. For a guy in the late 19th century, Lowell looks a lot like the Elon Musk of his time. He envisioned and built the influential Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere. And this changed the game because he was the first astronomer bright enough to think that, putting a giant telescope in a desolate area would help with their line of work. He was also hell-bent on studying Mars and went down this rabbit hole, thinking that there were canals on Mars and there must be a very desperate culture using them to irrigate their crops from the meltings of their polar ice caps. If you've read H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, one of the eternal gems of science fiction, you might be interested to know that Lowell's work heavily influenced Wells' own imagination. Lowell released this book called Mars in 1895, giving a whole new life to the Martian civilization theory. People were captivated. And rightly so. I mean, Lowell was rich and famous and was a kind of a scientist. Unlike now, it was a big deal back then. And to H.G. Wells, if there was such a desperate culture as Lowell imagined, the next logical step would be to invade south of London. I should say that I agree with Wells here. Okay, I'm getting off topic here. Lowell also got very excited about some spokes he had seen on Venus. Despite the knowledge back then that Venus had a thick atmosphere which renders its surface invisible to Earth, it appears that on this one, he had fallen victim to an optical illusion, where he unknowingly turned his telescope into a giant ophthalmoscope. Essentially what he saw, in fact, were veins in his own eyes. In 1906, Lowell finally, and historically speaking, catches a break when he theorized the probable existence of a ninth planet beyond Neptune. He calls it SpaceX. No, that was Elon Musk. Lowell called it Planet X. Despite this breakthrough, Lowell's initial dedication to a 13cm aperture setup was, as we know now, why he will remain stuck in this pursuit. The field of view at this level is too small for this purpose. However, in 1914 he did borrow a 23cm telescope which could in theory have performed this trick. But Lowell and his observatory hunted for this elusive planet until his death a decade later in 1916. After his death, the search for Planet X kind of died down. The United States and Europe were reeling from World War I, and the world had different priorities. And one of the greatest characters to ignite not only the field of observatory astronomy, but the imagination of the public was lost forever. We won't see such an influential character until perhaps Carl Sagan shows up. But now I should rewind a little bit and introduce you to Constance Lowell, Percy Lowell's wife. She enters into this story rather late. In 1908, abruptly, they get married. And everyone who knew Lowell was surprised, mostly because he had this thing going on with his loyal secretary for the longest time. And Constance enters into Lowell's life like a storm. And that's how everybody who knew Constance would describe her. An unpredictable storm. See, she was a real estate mogul. She made her fortune speculating on the real estate price in Boston. But when Lowell died, she contested his will and fought with the observatory for a decade to reverse Lowell's will. This was another reason for the hiatus in search of Planet X. And how she went about this was pretty nasty too. But this is not the focus of this story. Beside all these drama for the money, Constance wanted Lowell's legacy to be preserved in the way of finding Planet X. In 1929, when this drama had finally concluded, the observatory's legend Vesto Slipher found this talented young prodigy called Clyde Tombaugh, kind of a younger Percy Lowell, picked him up straight off his farm in Illinois. Okay, I must briefly geek out here. Vesto Slipher is the guy who actually identified the redshifting of the galaxies. It is not Edwin Hubble, a very common mistake. Hubble, however, came up with the proof, put all this together, and came up with a game-changing Hubble's law. Of course, his recognition is rightly deserved. But Steve Jobs didn't invent the smartphone either. So Tombaugh, the new guy at the observatory, proves to be the right hire. He just picks up straight where Lowell had left off and wastes no time. He uses a state-of-the-art 33cm astrographer and checks out sections of the sky few nights apart. And right where Lowell had predicted, he sees something to be moving relative to the night sky. And it all looks like it checks out. It's right after Neptune. And behold, planet X is discovered. And you know what? They find that Lowell was so close too. Remember that borrowed telescope? It appears that there were transition photographs of Pluto in those pictures all along. Following a competition, the planet is named after the Roman deity of the underworld and to memorialize the initials of Percival Lowell, PL. The planet is named Pluto. And if you still want to know how Pluto got kicked out of our Federation of Planets, let me recommend CGP Grey and The SciShow. Be sure to leave a comment on what you think about Percival Lowell and Pluto's fate. I'll see you next time.